The rain had been falling for 2 days when she opened the door, looked at the mud on my boots and the wrapped cloth around my knee and said, "Come in then. Sit near the fire." She did not ask my name. She did not ask where I had come from. She simply moved aside, and the warmth of the cottage reached me before I crossed the threshold. I had been the Alpha King of Aldenmore for 11 years. I had sat in judgment over disputes that divided families, commanded 400 wolves in the field, received delegations from pack holds, whose names I had to read twice before I could place them on a map. Not one person in my territory had ever looked at me the way Marin did in that first moment. Not with deference, not with calculation, not with the performance of warmth they hoped I would reward. She looked at me the way you look at a problem that wants solving, a limping stranger in the rain and a fire already burning inside. She said, "Sit, I'll get something for that knee." I said, "That is the beginning of the story. Everything before it was 11 years of waiting for something I had no name for, and everything after it was the rest of my life. I should tell you about the council, because you will need to understand what drove me to the outer villages in travel clothes, with a wrapped knee I did not need, and a false name I had not used since boyhood. My council of 7 had been trying to find me a mate for 3 years. They were not wrong to try. A pack hold without a Luna is a ship without a second anchor. It will hold in calm weather, but the first bad storm finds its weakness. I knew this. I had sat alone in the Alpha's chair through 3 years of that bad weather, and I knew it the way you know a cold draft from a window you cannot find, constant, sourceless, wearing. But the women they brought me. They came in good faith, most of them, daughters of allied pack holds, sisters of ranking Omegas, women with lineage and name, and the correct understanding of what it meant to be seen on the arm of the Alpha King of Aldenmore. They came dressed in their finest, with their warmest smiles carefully arranged, and they said all the right things, and not one of them looked at me the way you look at something that surprises you. They looked at me the way you look at a position you are trying to fill. I did not blame them for it. The arrangement was honest in its way. They wanted the security and honor of the Luna's chair, and I wanted a true mate, and those two desires had almost nothing to do with each other. After the 7th such meeting, my head counselor, a careful man named Oreth who had served my father before me, pulled me aside and said, with the diplomatic gentleness that was his great gift, "My lord, perhaps the difficulty is in the expectation. Perhaps a bond of duty, steadily kept, is enough." I looked at him for a long moment. "Orath," I said, "my grandfather found his fated mate in the middle of a border dispute. He had ridden out to settle a quarrel over a stream boundary, and she was standing in the stream, insisting the boundary stone had been moved, and he said that was the moment his wolf went still for the first time in 30 years. They were together until he died." Oreth was quiet. "I am not looking for a performance of a bond," I said. "I am looking for the thing itself." He bowed his head slightly and said nothing more, but I could see in his careful eyes what he believed, that I was holding a child's story against a grown man's reality, and one day I would have to put the story down. That was in early summer. By the time the amber came into the leaves, I had made my decision. There is an old tradition in Aldenmore, older than my grandfather, older than the hold at Corvinhill, perhaps as old as the pack itself. The story goes that a true bond mark, the kind that comes from a fated mate rather than a declared mate, ignites only through an honest touch, not a ceremony, not a presented hand in a candle-lit hall with the council watching. An ordinary touch, a bandage tied, a cup passed, a hand taken in comfort between two people who are simply themselves, with nothing performed between them. I had read about it in the old records. The archivist who had catalogued those records, a sharp-eyed woman named Deva who had served 3 alphas and trusted none of them fully, had mentioned it once in passing, with the particular tone she used for things she believed but could not prove. "The old accounts suggest," she had said in her careful way, that the mark has its own intelligence. It waits for honesty. I had thought about that for 11 years. And then, one morning in late autumn when the rain had set in, and the council had scheduled yet another introduction. This one the daughter of the northern Westhello pack lord, a young woman I had already met twice at treaty gatherings and found perfectly pleasant and entirely wrong. I called my guard captain, Bren, to my study and told him what I intended. Bren was a wolf of 38 years, built like a root structure, utterly unreadable to everyone except me. He listened to the whole plan without expression. When I had finished, he said, "You want a ride to the outer villages, alone, in plain clothes, with a false injury?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Until I find what I am looking for, or until I am satisfied there is nothing to find." A pause long enough to mean something. Then, "I will follow at a distance, tree-line distance." I had not asked him to come at all. I did not say thank you. We understood each other. I sent word to Orath that I was attending to a private matter in the western reaches of the territory, and would return within the week. I dressed in the traveling clothes I kept for inspection rides, plain wool, no markings, a good cloak that could belong to any man of middling means. I wrapped my right knee in linen, tight enough to produce a convincing limp. I had twisted that knee in a training fall 4 years ago, and I still remembered precisely how the discomfort sat in the joint, how it changed my stride. The performance required almost no thought. Then I rode west, into the rain, with my wolf running quiet beneath my ribs and the gray sky pressing down over the old-growth forest of Aldenmore. The outer villages were not what most people in Corvinhull imagined when they thought of my territory. Those who lived and worked near the hold, the ranking families, the council members, the traders who moved between the great pack holds, thought of Aldenmore as Corvinhull. The stone hall with its carved pillars, the training yards, the archive tower, the market square on the third day of every week. They thought of pack law and pack ceremony and the careful social mathematics of who stood where in the hall at a gathering. The outer villages were something else. They were older, quieter, less interested in the mathematics. They sat at the forest's edge, where the pack hold's formal influence thinned out and became something more like weather, present, shaping, but not precisely governed. The people there lived in the practical daily rhythm of wood and season and neighbor debt, and they reported to the pack census every year, and for the most part they went about their lives without much thought of the Alpha King sitting in Corvinhull. I had ridden through them on inspection, of course, but on inspection you are yourself, crowned with rank, surrounded by guard, received with the particular stiff courtesy that authority produces. You learn nothing from an inspection except what people are willing to show you when they know you are watching. I wanted to see what happened when they did not know. The first day I rode through 3 hamlets and stopped twice, once at a roadside stall where a woman sold roasted roots and cider, and once at a small inn where I ate a plain meal and listened to the conversation around me. I was nobody in particular. The cider seller gave me fair measure and no extra. The innkeeper was pleasant and professional. An old man at the next table offered unsolicited advice about the road ahead, and when I thanked him, he shrugged and said, "Rain's going to worsen. If you're heading west, cut through the lower meadow path before the stream crossing floods." It was a kindness with nothing behind it, but the simple truth that he knew the road and I did not. I took the lower meadow path. On the second day, the rain did worsen, as the old man had predicted, and my horse took a stone in his shoe on the far side of the stream crossing, and I was leading him through mud when I came around the bend in the road and saw the scatter of stone cottages that made up the hamlet of Westhello. And at the far end, a single cottage set a little back from the others, with firelight in its window and a bundle of dried herbs hanging above the door. A healer's mark. In the outer villages, that meant the person inside had declared themselves willing to help, whatever came. I knocked. She was not what I expected, though I cannot tell you precisely what I had expected instead. Something about the healer's mark and the isolated cottage had prepared me, I think, for someone older, a woman of my grandmother's generation, gray-haired and brisk, the kind of competence that has decades of practice behind it. Marin was perhaps 30. Dark hair pulled back from her face without ceremony, a work dress of plain wool in a faded green, hands that were already moving when she opened the door, as if she had been in the middle of something and simply redirected toward the new problem without breaking stride. She took in the mud, the horse, the linen wrap on my knee, and the rain that was by then falling in the determined, humorless way that says it intends to continue until it has made its point. "Come in then," she said. "Sit near the fire." I tied the horse under the shallow overhang along the cottage's side wall. There was a hook there, and a bucket, and I noted without surprise that both had been placed by someone who thought about the needs of others, and I went inside. The cottage was small and precisely organized. A hearth, a worktable lined with bundled herbs and clay pots of varying sizes, a narrow shelf of written volumes that surprised me, 2 chairs near the fire, and a sleeping area behind a curtain. Everything was worn and clean and in its correct place. She kept the kind of order that is not for show, the order of a person who works alone and knows exactly where every tool is, because knowing costs nothing and not knowing costs time. She came to look at my knee without being asked. "May I?" I said yes. She knelt, unwrapped the linen with efficient hands, and examined the joint with the impersonal attentiveness of someone who has looked at a great many injuries and is interested in this one only insofar as it tells her what it needs. She pressed carefully at the sides. I had wrapped it to suggest a twist, and the wrapping itself had created a mild stiffness that I supposed she could feel. "Old injury," she said. "4 years ago. And you've been walking on wet ground since morning." It was not a question. She re-examined something with 2 fingers. "The joint is inflamed. It will pass, but you should stay off it for a day at least." I looked at her. "I have road to cover." She looked back at me with the expression of a person who has heard that sentence before and finds it unimpressive. "The road will still be there tomorrow," she said. "The joint will be worse tomorrow if you push it. That is the arithmetic. Sit." I sat. She fed me that first evening without discussion. There was a pot of something on the fire, a thick soup with barley and root vegetables, the kind of meal that is made from what is available rather than from any particular inspiration, and is better for it. And she ladled out a bowl and set it in front of me, and went back to the work on her table, as if feeding travelers was a minor administrative task she had completed and could now set aside. I ate and watched her work. She was preparing something with dried leaves and what appeared to be rendered fat, a drawing salve. I would learn later, for the old man 3 cottages over who had taken a burn from his cooking fire and refused to go to the larger village for treatment. She worked with the methodical focus of someone who is not performing competence but simply exercising it, the way you breathe, without attention to the mechanics of breathing. After a while I said, "You live here alone?" "Yes," she said. "Not concerned, this far out from the main hold?" She glanced up briefly. "The pack wolves come through on their ranging. Nobody bothers a healer, it's bad strategy." There was a dry logic to that which made me want to smile. I did not. I said, "You trained somewhere?" "My mother," she said. She learned from her mother. "We have been healers in this family for a long time." A pause, her hands continuing to work. "You?" "I travel," I said. "I trade." A simple cover, the kind that answers the question and invites no follow-up, vague enough to mean almost anything. She accepted it without apparent interest. "Eat," she said. "The soup is better hot." I ate. Outside, the rain intensified briefly, and then settled into a steady drumming on the cottage roof. The fire shifted and resettled. My wolf, who had been a constant low hum of restlessness for 3 years, the persistent, directionless hunger that had no name, went very quiet. Not still, that is important. not the flatline stillness of a wolf that has given up wanting. Something more alive than that. The stillness of a wolf that has located what it was hunting and is now, for the first time in a long time, completely present. I noticed. I said nothing. I finished the soup and thanked her, and she said, without looking up, "There is a pallet in the back if you need it. The rain is not going to stop tonight." I stayed. She woke early. I heard her moving before the light had fully changed, the small sounds of someone who knows their own cottage in the dark, the soft step, the particular creak of a specific floorboard avoided, the sound of water poured with controlled care. When I came out from behind the curtain, she had already stoked the fire and had a small pot of grain cooking, and there was a cup of something herbal on the table that she pointed at without speaking. I sat, I drank it. It was bitter and medicinal and very effective at clearing the heaviness of a night's sleep on an unfamiliar palate. "Company's already come," she said. I looked toward the door. Through the window I could see two people waiting outside, a woman with a child on her hip and an older man leaning on a stick. Marin opened the door and spoke to them both, and then the woman and child came in and she attended to the child first. A cough, the rattling kind that sounds worse than it is, with the efficiency and gentleness of someone who has separated those two qualities and can deploy them independently, efficient where efficiency serves and gentle where gentleness serves. The child was frightened of the smell of the salves. Marin talked to the child about something entirely unrelated, something about a fox that had apparently been seen near the far meadow, which the child found very interesting, while her hands did the work the child would have tensed against if she had watched it. When the woman and child left, she called in the old man. I sat in the corner and watched. She did not ask me to leave. I did not offer to. It seemed, somehow, that my being in the corner was simply another administrative fact she had accounted for and found acceptable. The old man's burn was worse than she had apparently expected. She said so plainly, without alarming him, "This is more inflamed than it should be by now. You've been covering it with something." "A poultice," he said, defensive. "What kind?" He named it. She was quiet for a moment in the way that doctors are quiet when the answer is not good news. Then she said, "That particular mixture seals the surface, but it also traps what needs to drain. I am going to have to treat this more aggressively than I would have yesterday. It will be uncomfortable. Do you want me to do it now, or do you want a day to arrange for someone to stay with you?" He said he had no one to stay with him. She said, "Then stay here today. I will keep an eye on it." He tried to protest the imposition, the trouble, and she said, with a directness that was not unkind but brooked no argument, "Sit in the chair by the window. You are not imposing. You are a patient with a wound that needs watching. Those are different things." He sat, she worked, he stayed the morning. I watched all of it. At midday, when the old man had dozed in the chair and the rain had eased to a gray drizzle, Marin came to sit across from me and ate the food she had neglected to eat that morning, a piece of bread and a handful of dried apples, and she looked at me directly for what felt like the first time. Not the healer's look, assessing and impersonal, something more level than that. "You've been watching all morning," she said, not an accusation, an observation. "I have. Most people are uncomfortable being watched." "I am not most people," I said, and then caught myself, because that was precisely the kind of thing the Alpha King of Aldenmore might say, the kind of slip that costs a disguise. But Marin only tilted her head slightly. "No," she said. "I don't think you are." She bit a piece of apple. "Where are you from? Not the East, you don't have that accent. Central Territory." "Close enough," I said. She accepted this. "Business." "Of a kind." She regarded me for another moment with the particular steadiness that I was beginning to recognize as one of her primary characteristics. Not suspicion, not scrutiny exactly, but the calm attentiveness of someone who does not rush her conclusions. Then she said, simply, "All right." and went back to her apple. I do not know how to explain what that did to me. I have been accepted and deferred to my entire adult life. I have been managed and positioned and carefully handled by people who wanted something from the Alpha King of Aldenmore. I had not in 11 years had someone look at me directly, note that I was being evasive, accept it without fuss, and return to eating an apple. My wolf made a sound I can only describe as recognition. The afternoon brought more visitors. A woman with a sprained wrist. Marin showed her how to bind it and told her to come back in 3 days. A young man who had caught something feverish and looked miserable. She sent him home with a tincture and a very specific set of instructions about sleeping and not sleeping, about how much water to drink and when, and she made him repeat the instructions back to her until she was satisfied he had them. A girl of perhaps 12 who came alone and stood in the doorway without speaking for almost a full minute before Marin looked up and said, quietly, "Close the door. It's cold." The girl came in. They spoke very quietly at the work table. Whatever the conversation was, I did not hear it, and it was not for me to hear. Marin's face during it was attentive and completely without judgment, and when the girl left she had something small wrapped in cloth, a remedy for something, and her shoulders, which had been held up around her ears when she arrived, had come down. When she had gone, I said, without thinking, "You keep no record of what you give out." Marin looked at me. "No account of who owes what," I said. "I have been watching all day. You keep records of what you have in stock. You keep records of treatment. I have seen you write notes after each patient, but you keep no account of payment." She considered this for a moment. "Some people bring things. That old man with the burn, he brought firewood last winter. The woman with the wrist will probably send something from her garden in the spring. The girl who just left has nothing to send." A pause. "That is not a problem that needs solving." I looked at her for a long moment. "You are not worried that people will take advantage of that policy?" "Some do," she said with equanimity. "Most don't. People know the difference between need and convenience. They are not generally stupid about it." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you testing me?" The question arrived without hostility, delivered in the same level tone as everything else she said. I held very still for a moment. Then I said, with as much honesty as I could offer without the whole truth, "I have been testing a theory." "About what?" "About what people are like when they think no one important is watching." Something moved across her face, not offense, more like consideration. She said, "And what do you conclude?" "That most people are much what they are when someone important is watching," I said. "And a few are rather better, and a few are worse, but fewer than you would expect." She looked at me steadily. "Which am I?" "The same," I said. "You are exactly the same whether anyone is watching or not." She looked at me for another moment, and then, for the first time since I had come through her door, she smiled. Not a performance, not the practiced warmth of a woman hoping to please. A brief, genuine smile, the kind that arrives when something strikes you as unexpectedly true. "I suppose that is a compliment," she said. "It is the highest one I know how to give," I said. She held my gaze for a beat longer than was necessary. Then she stood and went to check on the old man, who had woken from his doze, and was looking around the cottage with the slightly bewildered expression of someone who has slept somewhere unfamiliar. I sat very still and tried to understand what was happening to my wolf. He was not restless anymore. That was the thing. For 3 years he had been a current beneath everything I did, the low, constant urgency of a creature looking for something it cannot name. Now he had gone quiet in a way that was not resignation. It was the particular quiet of a wolf at the end of a very long hunt, who has found the thing it was following and stands in the moment before the next step, fully, completely present. I had read the old accounts. I knew what this meant, or I thought I did. But knowing a thing from a text and standing in it are not the same experience, and the difference between them was considerable. I went outside in the drizzle on the pretext of checking my horse, who was perfectly comfortable, had been eating from the bucket of feed Marin had quietly put out that morning without mentioning it to me, and I stood in the damp air and told myself to be careful. She was my fated mate. I was becoming more certain of it with every hour, but certainty from my side of the bond was not the same as proof. The mark, the old bond mark that the tradition described, ignited only through honest touch, and I had not touched her yet, not in any meaningful way, not the touch that would tell us both what I was beginning to know. And she had no idea who I was. That was the thing I had not fully considered when I had ridden out from Corvinhill in plain clothes with my false limp and my vague cover story about trading. I had thought of it as a test for her, a way to find a woman who would be kind and honest without the distorting pressure of knowing she was being observed by the Alpha King. I had not fully thought through what it would mean to find her, and to know what she was to me, and to be standing in her cottage wearing a lie. Bren was in the tree line. I knew he was there because he was always where he said he would be. I did not signal him. I went back inside. That evening, after the old man had gone home with careful instructions, and a small pot of the salve Marin had prepared for him, she sat at the fire and read. She did not speak, and she did not invite conversation, and the quiet was entirely comfortable. It was the quiet of a person at home in her own silence, and it asked nothing of me. After a while I said, "Those books on the shelf, not all of them are medical texts." She did not look up. "No. The spines I can read from here, 2 of them are histories." "Packhold histories," she said. "Old ones. My grandmother had them. She believed that a healer who did not know the history of the territory could not fully understand the people she was treating." A pause, still reading. She was not wrong. "What do you know about the Alpha King of this territory?" She did look up then. Something in her expression shifted, not alarm, more like increased attention. "Why do you ask?" "Curiosity," I said. "I have been in Aldenmore for 3 days. I have not heard anyone speak of him, one way or another. People usually have opinions about their Alpha." She considered this. "People here do, they simply don't talk about it to strangers." She looked at me directly. "Are you not a stranger?" "I am," I said. A pause. Then, with the particular honesty that I had by now recognized as her default mode of operation, "They think he is fair. Some think he is cold. The ones who have had disputes settled know he listens to both sides. He has not started a war in 11 years, and the last conflict he ended without significant losses, which required better strategy than luck." She looked at the fire. "The ones in this village think about him the way you think about good weather. They are glad of it, and they notice when it changes." "And you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I have never met him," she said. "I would not presume to have an opinion about a person I have not met." "Most people do," I said. "Most people presume a great deal," she said simply. "I find it saves time to wait." Outside, the rain had fully stopped. Through the single small window I could see a piece of clear sky, and the particular quality of the silence that follows rain when it is finished meaning business. I said after a moment, "You are a careful person." She turned a page. "I am a precise person," she said. "It is not the same thing. Careful people avoid. Precise people simply want to be accurate." I had nothing to say to that, and so I said nothing. And after a while the fire settled, and she set down her book, and I said I should sleep. She said good night without ceremony, and I went behind the curtain, and I lay on the pallet in the dark and understood very clearly that I was in considerable trouble. On the morning of the 3rd day, I told her I would be leaving. She received this with the same equanimity she received everything. "Your knee has improved," she said. "You should still be careful on wet ground for the next few days." She went to her work table and wrapped something in cloth, a small packet of the dried herbs she used for inflammation, with a brief set of instructions written on a piece of paper in her precise, unornamental hand. She held it out to me. I took it. Our fingers did not touch. She was already turning back to the table. I looked at her back, the set of her shoulders, the particular way she stood, the complete absence of any expectation in her posture. She was not waiting for a reaction from me. She was simply doing what she did, providing what was needed and moving on to the next thing. And I understood that if I left now, I would be leaving with my certainty and no proof, and I would ride back to Corvinhull with the knowledge that I had found my fated mate, and the inability to tell her so without explaining a lie I had told, and the bond mark would wait, and the council would continue, and another season would pass. Or I could stay one more moment. "Maren," I said. She turned. "Before I go, will you? My wrist has been bothering me as well, since yesterday, something in the joint." I held out my right wrist, and it was not entirely a lie because I could feel it now, not an injury, something else, a heat below the skin that I knew for what it was. "Would you look at it?" She came without hesitation. She took my wrist in both her hands, turned it to the light, pressed carefully to locate the source. And the world changed. I felt it first. Of course I did. I was looking for it, or I thought I was. But nothing in the old accounts, nothing in the careful, dry language of the archive records, had prepared me for the reality of it. Silver fire, running from the point of her touch up through my wrist and into the bone and through the bone and into every part of me at once. Not painful, not frightening, not even exactly surprising, because some part of me that had been waiting for 11 years simply recognized it the way you recognize a sound you have been straining to hear and have finally caught. She gasped. I looked at her hands, still on my wrist. The mark was visible on both of us, silver white, moving like light on water, running from the point of contact. On her wrist, where the sleeve of her work dress had pulled back slightly, I could see it. An old mark, faint and faded, that must have been there for years without her knowing what it meant. And now it was a light, answering the same call from mine, the two halves of a thing that had always been a single whole. She pulled her hands back, not frightened, startled, with the expression of a precise person encountering data they did not anticipate. She looked at her own wrist, then at mine, then at me. "What is this?" she said. Her voice was steady. That was her, steady even in the middle of something she could not explain. I had planned, in some version of this moment, to have an answer ready. A gentle, composed answer. Something that took its time and built carefully to the truth. But standing in front of her with the bond mark still burning silver on my wrist and her eyes on me with that direct, waiting attention, I found that I could not do anything except be accurate. "It is called a bond mark," I said. "In the old tradition of this pack hold, it means we are fated mates." I paused. "And I owe you a truth. My name is not what I told you. My name is Kaelin. I am the Alpha King of Aldenmore. I came here in plain clothes because I needed to know." I stopped. She was looking at me. Her expression had moved through something, through the startle, and then through what might have been anger, and then through something more complicated, the expression of someone working quickly through a great deal of information. "You were testing," she said. "Yes." "And the knee?" "Was a cover, though the joint is genuinely warm now." I glanced at my wrist, then back at her. "The rest was true. What I told you about watching people, about what they are when no one important is watching. I was looking for someone who is the same either way." A pause. I found her. She was quiet for a moment that felt very long. Then she said, "You ate my soup under false pretenses." The oddness of the sentence, so small against the size of what had just happened, caught me entirely off guard. "Yes," I said. "And you let me lecture you about staying off a knee you did not need to stay off." "You were correct about the rain," I said, "and the arithmetic. I found it genuinely useful advice." Something shifted in her face. It was not yet a smile. It was the predecessor to one, the tightening around the eyes of someone deciding whether a thing is funny or infuriating, and arriving, slowly, at both at once. "You are the Alpha King," she said. "Yes." "Of Aldenmore." "Yes." "And you have been sitting in my chair for 2 days eating my soup and watching me work." "Eating your soup," I said, "watching you work and becoming increasingly certain that there is no one in this territory more suited to be Luna of Aldenmore." I kept my voice even because I did not want to rush her and I did not want to perform anything, and I owed her at least that much. The bond mark is not a command. It is a recognition. What you do with it is your decision. But I thought I owe you the truth of what it is and what I am and what you mean. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked at her wrist, and I watched her process the sight of the mark still faintly silver in the morning light, old and new at once, the faint trace of something that had always been there, and the bright living fact of what it had become when she had touched me. She turned it in the light. Her face was considering, not troubled, the expression of a precise person taking her time to be accurate. She asked me to sit down. I sat. She sat across from me in the chair where I had spent 2 days watching her work, and she put her wrist on the table between us with the mark visible, and she looked at it and then at me, and she said, "Tell me what this means. The old tradition, all of it." I told her. She listened without interrupting. She had the quality I had noticed in her with every patient, the ability to receive information without immediately trying to manage it, to simply take it in and let it settle before she responded. When I had finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you came here specifically because of this, because you believe the mark only ignites through honest touch." "Through honest touch between people who are being themselves," I said. "Yes." "And the council paraded women before you." "For 3 years." She looked at me with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite amusement, but lived somewhere between them. "And none of them worked." "None of them were my mate," I said, "and I could not know that without the mark, and the mark would not ignite through ceremony." She nodded slowly, processing. "Then, the woman this morning, the one with the sprained wrist, did you notice that she was wearing a mating mark of her own, a declared bond, not a faded one?" The question surprised me. I said I had not noticed particularly. "It was a contracted bond," Marin said. "A good one, her mate treats her well, you could see it in her ease, but a contracted bond and a faded one look different on the skin. The color is different. The faded mark carries more silver." She looked at her own wrist again. I had wondered about mine over the years. My grandmother told me once that it might be a residue from a female line bond, a mark passed through the maternal side when a fated pair had children. I thought that was the explanation. "It was not," I said. "No," she said, "it was not." Another pause. "It was yours, waiting." I said nothing. She was doing what she always did, taking her time to be accurate, and anything I said would be an interruption. After a moment she said, "I am going to ask you a practical question." "Ask." "What happens now, practically? I am aware that I am the Alpha King's fated mate, and I am aware of what that means in terms of the bond, and I have read enough of the Packhold histories to know what the title of Luna means in governance terms. But what I would like to understand is the day-to-day architecture of it. I have patience. I have this." She gestured at the cottage, the work table, the shelf of books, the jar of drawing salve still half prepared. "This is what I do. Is there room for that?" I looked at her steadily. "You would be making decisions about the well-being of the Packhold," I said. "That includes its health, its healers, the supply and training of medical knowledge across the outer villages. That is exactly what you already do, at a larger scale." She considered that, and the council will need to adjust their understanding of what the Luna of Aldenmore looks like, I said. Something in her expression, a brief, carefully contained flash. They wanted someone more strategic. They wanted someone with a noble family connection, someone the allied Packholds would recognize as suitable. And instead they will have a village healer with a shelf of books and a debt-free policy. "Yes," I said. They will. She looked at the fire, then at me. Then she said, with the directness that was simply her natural mode, I am not performing anything for them. I will not learn to perform anything for them. That is not something I am willing to do. I know, I said. It is the reason I am here. Another of those long, considering silences. Then she stood, went to the window, looked out at the clearing after the rain, the wet road, the dripping trees, the particular quality of autumn light that comes when rain has washed the air completely clean. Your guard is in the tree line, she said. He has been there since the first afternoon. I did not say anything because it seemed like your business. I stared at her. A horse has a particular way of moving in cover when it is trying to be quiet, she said, without turning around. You hear it differently when you live this far out. You learn what belongs to the forest and what does not. She looked over her shoulder at me. He should come in. He has been out there in the rain for 2 days. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, You are going to be extraordinary at this. She turned fully back to the room. That predecessor to a smile tightening was there again, and this time it arrived. Brief, genuine, the smile of a person who has been surprised by a truth. I have no idea what I am going to be, she said, but I am going to be accurate about it. That much I can promise. Bren came in from the tree line. He stood in the doorway of Marin's cottage, 6 feet and 4 inches of impassive guard captain, rain damp, with the expression of a man who has spent 2 days in the cold forest and considers this a perfectly reasonable professional obligation. And he looked at Marin, and she looked at him, and she said, Sit near the fire. I will get something hot. He sat. She fed him without discussion. I watched this happen and felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for 11 years, and the word that came to me was not triumph, not vindication, not relief. The word was simply, right. The thing that has been wrong for a long time and is now right, and you recognize the rightness because you have been aware, however quietly, of the wrongness all along. Bren, who had served my father before me, and had not shown emotional response to anything in the 22 years I had known him, ate the soup with an expression that I can only describe as moved. I decided not to mention it. We rode back to Corvinhall the following morning. Marin had packed what she needed with the efficient speed of a person who knows exactly what she owns and what she values, which in her case was considerably less than the role of Luna typically suggested. She was not anxious. She was, as she was about everything, precise. She locked the cottage door. She left a note tucked in the frame of the healer's mark above the door telling anyone who came where to find her, and when she expected to return, and she did not look back when we rode away. She did look once at the forest around us as we moved into the deeper territory, the old-growth oaks with their amber leaves, the wet smell of the earth after rain, the particular quality of the morning light in Aldenmore when the sky has cleared. She looked at it the way you look at something you love, without performing the love. You have been here your whole life, I said. Almost, she said. My mother moved us when I was 7 from the eastern border villages. A pause. Aldenmore is a good territory. I am glad you think so, I said. It is yours now as much as mine. She looked at me sidelong, the level look I had first learned to recognize as assessment and later as something more personal, the look she gave to things she was deciding to trust. That is a significant thing to say, she said. I mean it significantly, I said. Another look. Then she faced forward, and we rode on through the old-growth forest of Aldenmore, and my wolf moved alongside me in the easiest stride it had found in 11 years. Corvinhall in autumn was the most beautiful version of itself. The stone of the hold's outer walls had gone gray-gold in the season's light, and the great oaks that ringed the training yard had turned to copper, and the carved pillars of the hall entrance showed the pack's founding crest, 2 wolves crossing, in their best relief when the light came from the west, as it did in the late mornings of the turning season. The hold was not expecting us. I had sent no signal ahead. When Bren and I and Marin rode in through the main gate, the stable hands came forward with the automatic response of people trained to respond to their alpha's return, and then they registered the third horse and the woman on it, and there was a particular pause, not rude, simply the pause of people recalibrating. My steward, Karen, appeared in the hall doorway approximately 40 seconds after we came through the gate. Karen had been at Corvinhull for longer than I had been alive, and had the particular gift of appearing exactly when something required appearing, with a perfectly neutral expression that conveyed everything. He looked at Marin, then at my wrist, where the bond mark was fully visible, silver-white, unmistakable, the kind of thing that cannot be explained away. Then he looked at me. "My lord," he said. "Send word to the council," I said. "I want them in the great hall within the hour." "Yes, my lord." He began to turn, then stopped himself, turned back, and allowed himself Karen, who had been perfectly neutral through 3 wars and a succession crisis, a single, small expression that was perhaps the most restrained version of profound relief I have ever witnessed. "Welcome back, my lord." He was looking at Marin when he said it. She received it with the equanimity she received everything. "Thank you," she said. "Is there somewhere I can wash my hands before we meet the council?" There was. Karen showed her himself. The council assembled in the great hall within the hour, as directed. 7 members, the oldest of whom had served my grandfather, the youngest of whom had been appointed 3 years ago and was still, despite himself, slightly nervous in my presence. They stood at the long table with the automatic formality that council gatherings produced, and they looked at Marin, dressed in her plain wool, her dark hair still simply arranged, her hands folded on the table in front of her with the same organized calm she brought to her work table, and they did not quite know what to do with what they were seeing. I gave them the explanation they needed. "This is Marin," I said. "She is a healer from the outer village of Westhellow, on the western border of Aldenmoor's territory. She is a woman of the pack, a precise and honest person and the holder of the faded bond mark, as I set my right wrist on the table. The mark was still clearly silver in the hall's light. Marin, beside me, placed hers beside it without being asked, the same simple precision with which she did everything. "She is my fated mate. She will be Luna of Aldenmoor." The hall was quiet. Orath, my head counselor, looked at the marks for a long moment. He had sat at this table through 3 years of introductions and careful negotiations and my own repeated refusals. He was a precise man himself, in his way, not as direct as Marin, but precise. And I watched him processing what the marks meant in the context of the old tradition, and what that meant for everything that had come before. Then he did something I had not expected. He stood from his chair, and he bowed. A full council bow, the formal acknowledgement of the Luna, not the social courtesy of a meeting, but the binding recognition. The rest of the council followed. Marin looked at the 7 people bowing to her across the great table of Corvinhull with the expression of someone receiving data they had not requested, and were now organizing as efficiently as possible. Then she said, in a voice that was entirely her own, not elevated, not performed, simply clear, "I am a healer. That will not change. What changes is the scale. I have been thinking on the road here about the outer villages. They have 1 healer to every 3 or 4 hamlets in the western reaches. That is not sustainable. I would like to look at the training and distribution of medical practitioners across the territory." A pause, the pause of a precise person not rushing her conclusion. That seems like a reasonable place to start. One of the younger council members, not the nervous one, the one with the carefully tended opinions, said, with a hesitation that was not quite objection and not quite question, "The Luna's role traditionally has focused on the social governance of the pack." "Then the role is expanding," I said before he could finish. He looked at me. I looked back. That was, as it turned out, the end of that particular thread of conversation. Orath said, still standing, with the cadence of a man who has arrived at something he has been circling for 3 years. "My lord. If I may," he looked at Marin, not at me, "the territory will be well served." Marin looked at him, the direct, level look. "I expect it will," she said. "That is the intention." He bowed again, small, not formal, the bow of a man who means it personally. There are things I did not anticipate in the days that followed. I did not anticipate that Marin would ask, not with any confrontational quality, simply as a matter of accuracy, to read the full records of every council meeting from the last 3 years. She read them the way she read everything, systematically, in order, without skipping, making small notes in her own hand in the margins of her personal copy. When she had finished, she came to my study and sat across from me and said, "There are patterns in the border village disputes that are not being addressed at the source. They are being adjudicated. But the source is resource distribution, specifically access to clean water from the northern tributaries during the dry months. Adjudicating disputes does not address the source." I looked at her. "I am not criticizing the council," she said. "I am saying that I think this is something I could help with. I know the outer villages. I know the people and how they think about their resources and their neighbors. I can be useful here." "Yes," I said. "I would like a formal role in the Water Resource Review," she said. "Not a ceremonial one, an actual one." "Yes," I said again. She looked at me with that level gaze. "You agree very easily." "You are precisely right," I said. "That is why." Something moved across her face, the expression I had first seen in her cottage when I said she was the same whether anyone was watching or not. The expression of someone surprised by a truth they had not calculated on. Then she made a note on her paper and went back to reading, and I went back to the dispatch I had been working on before she came in, and we sat in my study in the comfortable silence of two people who did not require performance from each other. My wolf lay entirely still, not the stillness of absence, the stillness of completion. I did not anticipate the outer villages. Word traveled faster than I would have expected, not through any official channel, but through the particular speed of practical people who know each other. Within a week of our return to Corvinhull, 2 healers from the western border villages sent word asking to speak with the new Luna about training access and supply. Marin replied personally, in her own hand, and set times. Karen, who managed the hold's correspondence with the ordered efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 40 years, came to me with those letters and said, with a perfect neutrality that I had learned to read as approval, "My lord, the response time from the outer villages is notably improved." I said I had noticed. He said, "The style of address in their letters has also changed." I looked at him. "They write to her directly," he said, "not through the formal channel. They write as they would write to someone they already know." I thought of the packed table of visitors in Marin's cottage, the woman with the sprained wrist, the old man with the burn, the girl of 12 who stood in the doorway, the debt-free policy that asked nothing and gave what was needed. "Yes," I said, "they do." Karen allowed himself another of his restrained expressions. "Very good, my lord," he said, and withdrew. I did not anticipate, either, what she asked me about my grandfather. It was late in the autumn, several weeks after the council meeting, and we were in the study after dinner. She was reading one of the Packhold histories from the archive, the oldest one, a handwritten volume that Deva had catalogued with reverent care, and she said, without looking up, "Your grandfather, his fated mate, the woman at the stream crossing." "Yes," I said. "She was not of any ranking family, was she?" "No," I said. "She was the daughter of a boundary keeper. Her father maintained the markers along the eastern stream for the Packhold. And the council of that time were unhappy," I said, "for approximately 3 months." She looked up then from the old book. And then my grandmother settled a succession dispute between 2 ranking families in a single afternoon, by the method of listening to both sides completely and then telling them, with the directness that was apparently her primary characteristic, precisely what the pack law said, and precisely why neither of their positions was the one the law supported. I met her eyes. The council revised their opinion. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked back at the book, found the page she had been on, and read it again. After a moment she said, very quietly as if to herself, "Precise." "Yes," I said. She turned the page. I watched her do it. The firelight moved on the old parchment and on her face, and outside the autumn darkness had arrived fully over Aldenmore, and the forest stood in the quiet that forests settle into when the day is done. I thought of the rain, the lit window, the door opening, the soup. I thought of a woman who had looked at a stranger in the rain and moved aside so the warmth could reach him, and had not asked his name, and had not asked what he could give in return, and had simply done what she did, provided what was needed and moved on to the next thing, because that was who she was, and there was no distinction in her mind between who she was and what she did. My wolf breathed in the ease of the unlooked-for thing, finally found. There is a last thing to tell. The day we went back to Westhellow, this was early winter, the first frost on the ground, the trees bare. Maren wanted to see the outer patients. She had arranged it formally, through the new framework she had proposed to the council, a circuit of the western border villages that she would do twice a year with the resources of the hold behind her. But this first one she did herself, just herself and 2 pack healers she had already begun training, and I rode with her because she had not asked me not to and I wanted to see. She worked from the far end of Westhellow back toward her old cottage, and the people who came to her came without formality, not the careful deference of people attending their Luna, but the straightforward practicality of people coming to their healer. The old man's burn was healed, finally, properly. The girl of 12 came back, with a mother this time, and the mother was guarded and the girl was not, and Maren greeted the girl first and the mother second, which was the exact correct order. At the end of the day, as the winter light was going, she went to the door of her cottage. She had the key in her hand, and she stood at the threshold for a moment looking at the healer's mark still above the door, and the note she had left still tucked in the frame, weathered now by several weeks of autumn rain but legible. I stood a little back watching her. She unlocked the door, opened it, looked at the inside, the hearth cold, the worktable clear, everything in its place. Then she left the key in the lock, turned and looked at me. "I am going to leave it unlatched," she said. I understood immediately. So anyone who needs help can knock. "There will be someone in the village who can keep watch on it," she said. "I will arrange it. A neighbor, someone who knows the remedies for the common things." She looked at the door for another moment. "And when we come back for the next circuit, it will be open." She did not say anything more. She relocked it, not to lock it but to leave it at a particular point of the mechanism, slightly released, so that someone who needed entrance would find the door gave with a firm hand, and she stepped back from the threshold. I came forward and stood beside her, and together we looked at the cottage in the first winter light. The worn stone, the dried herbs above the door, the warm window we had left dark, the threshold that had welcomed everyone who came. She said quietly, "My grandmother believed that a healer's door should never be fully closed. Even when the healer is somewhere else, the sign of it, the mark above the door, the unlocked frame, means something to the people who need it." A pause. "It means there is someone who has agreed to help. That the agreement does not expire." I thought of an alpha king riding through rain in plain clothes, looking for someone who helped for no reason, who was the same whether anyone was watching or not, who kept a fire burning in a lit window and moved aside when a stranger knocked. "No," I said, "the agreement does not expire." She turned from the door. She looked at me the way she had looked at me since the beginning, the level, direct look that did not perform anything and did not ask for anything, and simply saw what was there. And she put her hand in mine, the bond marks meeting in the cold air with the small silver warmth that I now understood I would feel for the rest of my life, ordinary as breathing and extraordinary as the first time, every time. Come, she said, it's cold. And we have a long ride back. We rode back to Corvinhall through the first frost of winter, through the bare forest of Aldenmore, as the evening star came out above the old-growth oaks, and the Packhold's lights appeared in the distance, warm and lit and waiting. Marin of Westhellow had left her door unlatched and her fire in someone else's care, and she was riding home. And Aldenmore had, at last, a Luna who had never tried to be one, only to be, with complete precision, herself. That, I have come to understand, was always the same thing.